Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, friends of Ukraine. Welcome to this cooperation event on Crimea hosted by the Embassy of Ukraine in Berlin and Kiev Dialogue. My name is Miriam Kosmel. I'll be your moderator for this web talk. Today's event is for a cause beyond the ongoing violations of international law and human rights. This is the Crimea platform Ukraine recently launched. First Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, Emine Japarova, will introduce it on the panel. Before I hand over now to Ambassador Melnik and Stefanie Schiffer for their welcoming remarks, let me briefly outline the setup. The Embassy and Kiev Dialogue have invited 4 speakers who will bring in their specific perspectives from politics, academia, and human rights work in the field. First Deputy Foreign Minister Japarova will begin. Then Olga Skripnik, head of the board of the Crimea Human Rights Group Ukraine, will speak on the worrying situation in Crimea itself and on the expert level of the Crimea platform. On Germany's stance, policy and actions, we'll hear from welcoming remarks. Let me briefly I have an echo now. Can I continue? Well, I'll continue to introduce the setup. I said First Deputy Vice Minister Japarova is going to start, then Olga Skripnik, and on Germany's stance, policy and actions, we'll hear from MP Güde Jensen, who is chairwoman of the Bundestag's Human Rights Committee. And a further analysis we get from Wilfried Jilge, contemporary historian and mediation advisor Ukraine at the Center for International Peace Operations in Berlin. As a longtime observer of Ukraine and the region, he'll speak on the impact of the Russian patterns of actions beyond Crimea. So with no further ado, Ambassador Melnik, you have the floor first, then directly Stefanie Schiffer. We'll see each other again for the panel. Mr. Ambassador.
Good morning to everyone, dear Minister Japarova, dear Emine, dear Ms. Jensen, dear Ms. Kosmel, dear Ms. Schiffer, dear Ms. Skripnik, dear Dr. Jilge. I wish to thank all of you for making this important event possible. Let me foremost express my deep gratitude to the Kiewer Gespräche for organizing and co-hosting this important discussion and for your long-time work in order to facilitate the Ukrainian-German dialogue in the last years. Though the topic of Crimea and its illegal occupation by Russia still remains on the political agenda in Berlin, and we Ukrainians do appreciate the steadfast position of the federal government and of the Bundestag in this regard, I still have the feeling that the urgency of this strategic issue is not always taking into account with due attention. Many Germans, and I mean not just ordinary citizens or even journalists, still believe that there will be no reunification of the Crimea with Ukraine because the Kremlin would never ever allow this happen. Therefore, the Ukrainians have to be realistic and just forget about this painful loss. Today, we have in Berlin 2 main policy pillars towards Crimea. The first is the non-recognition policy of the illegal occupation, and the second pillar are the sanctions which were introduced by the EU and the USA with respect to Russia. Let me stress that we do appreciate these 2 courageous steps of our German, our European, our American partners. And we are thankful for this strong solidarity. At the same time, we do not think that it is possible to reach a deoccupation, as we call it, by these significant instruments. We urgently need a third pillar, namely an international negotiation process about Crimea. Among many topics, that have to be addressed in this new future framework, the catastrophic human rights situation shall be one of the most prominent issues. And that is the reason why my President Zelensky, my Minister Kuleba have initiated a so-called Crimean platform as the first step in this direction. As you know, on the 23rd of August this year, there will be a summit in Kiev, and we very much hope that the Chancellor, who has been invited, could participate. Ladies and gentlemen, dear participants, before closing my introductory remarks, I wish to give an answer to all the people in Germany who are still skeptical whether we could succeed to reunify Crimea. I just wish to cite former German Foreign Minister Joschka Fischer, who said the following, and I quote, "The demand for the reunification of Germany I regard as a very dangerous illusion. We have to delete this Wiedervereinigungsgebot, as it's called, from the preamble of our basic law." This appeal was voiced on July 29th, 1989. That means 2.5 months before the Berlin Wall was finally turned down. And with this optimistic note, I wish to close my remark and just say that we are going to fight for the Crimea, for the people that are suffering, and we hope that our German friends, our German partners will further help us to reach that goal. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ambassador Melnik. Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear Minister Emine Japarova, dear Ambassador Andrei Melnik, dear Chairwoman of the Committee on Human Rights of the German Bundestag, Gita Jensen, dear Wilfried Jelge experts, Olga Skripnik, and dear Miriam Kosmel. On behalf of the Kiev Dialogue, I'm very glad, I'm honored to welcome you this morning to this discussion. The annexation of Crimea, as Ambassador Melnik said, by the Russian Federation was a rude violation of international law. It is a trauma for the whole of Europe. With the violent annexation of Crimea, Russia puts the European peace order at risk. Our peace, European values, and our continent are at stake. International community must never accept the annexation of Crimea. We must continue to stand up for the inviolability of borders in Europe and must not accept it as a fact, as Mr. Melnik compared it to the situation in Germany. We must believe and we must stand for this reunification. Therefore, the Kiev Dialogue welcomes this important initiative of the Ukrainian government to set up the Crimea platform. While the European Union has responded to the occupation of Crimea with sanctions, we all know that this is alone not sufficient to protect those who are persecuted in Crimea, those who cannot return to their homes, those who are imprisoned and silenced. It is our duty as a European civil society to demonstrate solidarity with these people and with those human rights defenders who are a special target of persecution in Crimea now. I hope that this discussion today and that the Crimea platform in future may contribute to keep Crimea on the international agenda. And I'm glad that Kiev Dialogue can host this important discussion today and so contribute to this important enterprise. What has happened will not be forgotten. We have to continue to talk about it. In this spirit, I wish you a constructive discussion today.
Thank you, Ambassador Melnik. Thank you, Stefanie Schiffer. And now, welcome to the panel. We'll have concise inputs from the 4 panelists for 5 minutes each, except for Madam Minister, who has 10 minutes speaking time to introduce the Crimea Platform Initiative. So after the first half hour, we can start the dialogue. Name is Omen, first on the panel and for the remaining last quarter of an hour with the audience. The questions you may have, please put them into the Q&A section that you can access via the respective function on the bottom of your screen. So, Madam Minister, you have the floor first.
Thank you, dear Mariam, for giving me extra 5 minutes. I'm very privileged to have a little bit more time. Dear friends, dear Andriy, dear Gide, Olga, Wilfried, and Stephanie, I'm really honored to join the discussion, not only as the first Deputy Minister, but also as the one who experienced the occupation in 2014, as a journalist, as the one who actually lived in Crimea. And I remember how I traveled Crimea back and forth, trying to make reportages, understanding that there was a Russian army, and feeling this great extent of cynicism when President Putin, during his first press conference after the events of 2014, he said that this was not Russian army. He denied the very fact of Russian presence there, saying that if anyone can buy a military uniform in any shop. But then in a couple of weeks, he said that the situation in Ukraine turned out to be that dangerous that they had to protect Russian people in Crimea and so on. And we're still living in this false world of narratives where my country is depicted in a very manipulative way. In Crimea, still there is a claim of Russian officials and experts that there is a rosy, picturesque life in Crimea. But the reality is totally different, and me and Olga will tell you more a little bit what is the real reality. And in Donbass, Russian propaganda is trying to convince the whole international community that there is a civil war, denying the very fact of presence behind that war, actually, by delivering the weaponry, by coordinating the war. So we still have been facing for 8 years the whole scope of the consequences of both occupation and Donbass. So my role today is a little bit probably brief you on what the Crimea Platform Initiative is about, why my country is looking for the new instruments on how to get the Crimean issue back to the international agenda, to the discussion, to the highest level of attention of our leaders, of our allies, and the whole world. So I will not stop in details, just only try to emphasize some of the tendencies that are most concerning for my country in terms of the human rights violation. Of course, when we say that Crimea has turned into a military base with 2.5 Ukrainian citizens as hostages, I think that this will not be an over-exaggeration, because from one hand, with this repressive reality where if anyone publicly dares to say that Crimea is Ukraine, one can be detained or put behind bars for at least 5 years. With this repressive reality, Russia is squeezing out Ukrainians from the peninsula, but from another hand, they bring hundreds of thousands of newcomers, of Russian citizens into Crimea, thus committing the war crime by changing the demographic landscape of the peninsula. And with this, forced conscription is being conducted, militarization of education, and I mean militarization of as such as a phenomenon. There is an active military buildup of all of the components of Russia presence: air, land, sea. The Black Sea security and the balance of powers in the Black Sea has been drastically changed. When the Sea of Azov has in fact turned into the inner lake of Russian Federation, and by having 6 or 7 submarines in Black Sea, Russia has more than enough instruments to control the whole aquatorium of the Black Sea. Forcible demographic change, political persecutions, political and cultural suppression. Probably the most concerning is the ban of Majlis by the Supreme Court decision of Russia in 2016. The representative self-governing body of the Crimean Tatar people have been declared an extremist organization, thus putting thousands of Crimean Tatars under the risk of being allegedly called and named and labeled as extremist, as we see today when over 100 political prisoners, the majority of them are Crimean Tatars, being allegedly called extremists. But there is one fact that we never ever had any fact of extremism or terrorist attack before 2014. And I think that we always have to keep in mind that immediately after occupation, we started to live in the world of extremists and terrorists in Crimea. Suppression of religious freedom, of course, forcing out the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, large-scale crackdown on Muslims, Jehovah's Witnesses outlawed and criminally persecutions, torture, extrajudicial killings, forced disappearance, and impunity for these crimes. It's all there. And probably the most concerning is the curtailment of freedom of expression and media, where the classic journalism is not yet there. A bunch of Ukrainian media outlets, they were forced to leave the peninsula, like the Center for Journalistic Investigation, the TV channel ATR, the TV channel Chernomorka, and many more. They are now working in exile, I would say, here in Kyiv, in the capital of Ukraine, because if you want to remain a journalist, I think that you would either risk your life or be deprived your license as a journalist. So the repression is already has already been demonstrated towards journalism. But as a phenomenon, what I was surprised to see in Crimea, that while oppressing the classic journalism, many activists appeared. These are average people who took their cell phones, their gadgets, and attended the court trials, the house searches, trying to fix and record all of the violations of the human rights and coordinating with the Ukrainian media. And for today, we have actually 9 citizen journalists in detention, 8 in detention and 1 under house arrest. So we have launched the Public Advocacy Mentorship Initiative, because let me assure you that publicity is probably one of the most practical instruments that saves life. I refer to this case very often when Nariman Mamedimilov, he's a citizen journalist. He spent 3 years in the prison for the video clip that he produced in 2013 about Islam, half a year before the occupation. So he was detained and put behind bars. And when he was released, I immediately called him, and he said that the only reason why he was not tortured was the publicity of his case. So with this, we launched the Public Advocacy Mentorship Initiative, which is supposed to bring awareness about the concrete cases, about the fates of people who suffer because of their activism. And I'm very happy that very prominent analysts, scientists, politicians have already joined the campaign, like Francis Fukuyama, Rupert Pollens, Antonio Stango, Anna Fatiga, Malgorzata Gusevska, and the others. They have accepted our proposal, and they will speak more about these concrete cases. So I'm kind of automatically go to what is our Ukrainian response to the occupation and all of those phenomena that I've already briefed you about. We have developed the national strategy on the occupation and reintegration that was approved by the president of Ukraine on March 2021, and before it was adopted within the Defense Council of Ukraine. So it gives the frame on the Ukrainian policy in legal, information, economic, humanitarian, foreign policy, social spheres, and more. And we say that our ultimate goal is the occupation, but we also understand by being committed to the peaceful resolution, there is a path, and there should be a very visible, practical, comprehensive roadmap on how to reach our ultimate goal, the occupation. So the Crimea platform is actually this response, which is a frame. It's not an international organization, so it's a frame that actually covers all of the layers. The government layer, the layer of the parliament, the expert layer, and I'm very happy that Olga Skripnik is the one who's actually leading the launch of the expert dimension of the Crimea platform, and I hope that she will speak a bit more about her leadership in this process. So as we define our strategic goal, the occupation, we also define our priority areas within the Crimea platform. This, as Ambassador said, consolidation of non-recognition policy and sanction, which is probably the only instrument of pressure that does not allow Russia to cross the red lines, even though every criminal has been dreaming to hide its crime. And what we see today, that Russia is already in panic with this initiative, saying that they will consider participation in the Crimea platform as a threat to the territorial integrity of Russia and their security. So it's also very cynical when first they annex the territory and then they try to threaten and blackmail the other countries about the participation. So the other priority areas, security, including freedom of navigation, because I think that what is the most concerning is militarization and the consequences of the militarization and Russian military buildup in Crimea, not only for the whole Black Sea region, but also for the bigger geography, I would say, because what we see, Crimea has been actively used as a projection of power and aggression into the Mediterranean and MENA region, like Libya and Syria. So I think that our attention to this issue is needed. Protection of human rights and international humanitarian law is yet another priority, and of course, overcoming negative consequences of economy and environment. This is how the Crimea platform, or the frame or the architecture of this platform, looks like. Heads of states and governments, as Ambassador said, 23rd of August, we will launch the Crimea Summit, where the Crimean Declaration or Crimean Charter will be adopted by the leaders who would attend the Crimea Summit. This will be inaugural summit that will launch this frame, and afterwards, and we are now working on the development of ecosystem of events and next steps in order to promote the Crimean issue. And hence, let's say, the coordination will be laid within the MFA of those countries joining the Crimea platform. Then the international expert network and the inter-parliament dimension that would focus on both adoption of legislation that we need in terms of strengthening our response for the consequences of occupation. And second, groups of friendship and parliamentary assembly of different countries. And we have already great examples how in Lithuania and Latvia, the members of parliament already launched the groups of support to the Crimea platform. And in Parliamentary Assembly of NATO, there is already a group of support for the Crimean platform. So the idea is to raise awareness, is to always discuss and seek additional answers to those comprehensive and difficult questions that we have. So I think that this is the final slide that I have, and my final message is actually that we think that the philosophy of Crimea platform lays within three pillars, three main elements, which is strategy, and we have performed this strategic vision. Second, consolidation, and we're now trying to consolidate international community around the Crimea Platform Summit as a frame for this negotiation about the future of Crimea. And on those steps, what more could be and should be done in terms of restraining Russia from their aggressive policies. And only this consolidation can bring us and lead us to the synergy, because I believe that the occupation is obviously a result of synergy of our international effort. And I'm very thankful for Germany for being as a strategic partner, for not only providing assistance, but being really ally of having unwavered position for the territorial integrity and sovereignty of my country, for supporting us in international forums, in United Nations, in Strasbourg, in Vienna. So my gratitude is with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Minister. And Olga Skripnik, why don't you continue right away?
Thank you. Good morning, dear all. Very happy to be here today. And first of all, thank you for this important event and attention to the human rights situation. I represent the Crimean human rights group. My colleagues and me are from Crimea. For example, I'm from Yalta, it's southern city, very beautiful. But we were forced to leave Crimea after occupation and have been constantly human rights monitoring since 2014 and collect evidence of human rights violation and war crimes. We closely work with Ukrainian government to prepare positions, Ukrainian position to international courts. For example, we submit 2 communications to International Criminal Court. And of course, I agree that the situation in Crimea is really tragic. And for all 7 years of occupation, international and national human rights organizations were reporting the effects of enforced disappearance, torture, illegal punishment, political motivated persecution, and imprisonment of Crimean activists. They use tools for direct or indirect discrimination against Crimean Tatar people and Ukrainians, as well as the destruction of any form of resisting to the occupation or keeping ties with Ukraine. And at least 111 Ukrainian political prisoners are held in custody now, and the Russian Federation continues to persecute Ukrainian and Crimean Tatar activists, as well as Ukrainian citizens who, while living in Crimea, opposed the Russian occupation and stand up for the peninsula as part of Ukraine. And some of political prisoners are Crimeans who are persecuted on religion grounds, like Jehovah's Witnesses. And last year, occupation authorities has not only begun criminal proceedings, but also for the first time imprisoned Jehovah's Witnesses members for their religion beliefs. And it's real punishment, 6 years in prison for religion beliefs. And despite the release in September 2019, including Crimeans, you know about Alexei Sov, Alexander Kolchenko, and Volodymyr Balov, but after that, no release happened. And Russian Federation continues to systematically use its so-called anti-terrorism legislation in Crimea as a tool of political oppression and persecution. For example, opens new cases against Muslim and Crimean Tatars. Many of them arrested on suspicion of belonging to Hizb ut-Tahrir, and we call it case against Crimean Muslims. Cases are considered in violation of the right to a fair trial. The main evidence for the court is a testimony of FSB witnesses, and many of whom are FSB men. And the evidence provided by the defense is usually not accepted by the judges. And among those accused in terrorism, there is a number of civil activists and citizen journalists, including members of the Crimean Solidarity Group, like Server Mustafayev, famous human rights defenders, and he is coordinator of Crimean Solidarity Group. And one more about persecution for freedom of speech. Recently, journalist of Radio Liberty, Vladislav Yesipenko, was arrested by FSB, but not only persecuted for freedom of speech, but are acting to the information isolation of Crimea. I think it's very important said about it. And this confirms that Ukrainian FM radio stations in Crimea were constantly blocked by the Russian broadcasters. Website of top Ukrainian media, Majlis of Crimean Tatar people, website of Ukrainian Ministry of Reintegration, blocked in Crimea. And moreover, the occupation authorities are trying to block the Ukrainian TV and radio signal in Kherson region. It's territory controlled by Ukrainian government near the Crimea. And few words about COVID situation. The occupation authority used the COVID to unreasonable restrict rights. For example, the prohibition of peaceful assemblies. The authorities punished even the participants in single pickets. But at the same time, on the current ban of holding peaceful assemblies and other public events, the occupation authority held a number of public militarist campaigns targeting the civilian population, including those attended by representatives of vulnerable groups to coronavirus. And maybe one more very important point about human rights situation, it's militarization of children in Crimea. The Russian Federation provides combat training for children, students. General aims of the Russian educational system in Crimea are shaping Russian national identity among students, shaping willingness to serve in Russian forces. And now at least 200,000 Crimean children are constantly influenced by the militarized education system. The main goals of the system are preparation for service in the Russian army and the destruction of Ukrainian identity of Crimean children. And maybe one more about situation with property. During the 7 years of occupation, a lot of Ukrainian state and private enterprises were nationalized, and Ukrainians, as known citizens of the Russian Federation, were deprived of the title to land plots in Crimea, and this process is still ongoing this year. And finally, we see that situation in Crimea shows that new mechanisms are needed to protect human rights in Crimea. Therefore, we consider it important to support the Crimean platform to find and implement such mechanism. And many human rights organizations and experts are actively involved in the development of the expert network of Crimean platform. And our main goal, main mission of expert level of Crimean platform, it's promote consolidation of international support to deoccupy the Autonomic Republic of Crimea and city of Sevastopol, guaranteeing security and safety of navigation in the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov to overcome its negative consequences, as well as development advocate experts' work in relevant subjects areas. And I think I pass the floor to my colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Olga Skripnik, for painting this worrisome picture to us in so much detail. And I'd like to pass to give the floor to MP Gyde Jensen now, who, as I said in the beginning, is the chairwoman of the Bundestag's Human Rights Committee.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kosmil. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. Also, it's a big honor to speak among so many experts. So I'm hoping that I can still reach certain expectations. And I'm very sorry for my voice. I'm in the midst of something that my daughter took home from kindergarten. So I have it now, she doesn't. And I hope you can understand me. Otherwise, I need to cough a little, maybe in between. I'd like to start by making some points from the overarching political perspective that we're currently discussing in Berlin, and I'd like to refer to Ambassador Melnik for that, because he pointed out certain pillars that are intermingled in this whole discussion that we're having today, but also in the past months in a very close manner. And as already pointed out by Madam Minister, but also by Olga Skripnik, that how the human rights situation is on Crimean ground. I would focus more on what Berlin can do, what the Bundestag can do, but also what other institutions that sometimes are a little bit off topic, even in Berlin, can do. So the first pillar that I'd like to point out is the Council of Europe pillar, because Ukraine is a very important partner within the Council of Europe, as is Russia. And I'd like to take you back a little bit into June. It's basically 2 years ago when we had a discussion in the Council of Europe, in the Parliamentary Assembly, discussing whether it was important to welcome the Russian delegation back into the Council of Europe, into the Parliamentary Assembly. And me and my colleague Konstantin Kuhle from the Liberals, we were the only ones in the German delegation that said, no, at that point, we do not want to welcome the Russian delegation back, because there has nothing, basically Russia has done nothing in the whole process since the illegal annexation of Crimea to get ahead of certain allegations, to work together with colleagues and partners in the Council of Europe, but also other formats. So we, at that time, and we still are of this opinion. We thought it was a big mistake to welcome the Russian delegation back, because since then, since these 2 years have been gone by, we see that the rhetoric, the propaganda, also the stage of the Council of Europe, the Russian delegation has used this stage for its own good. And I think how we should use this Council of Europe pillar now is to demand access, for example, of for Human Rights Commissioner Dunja Mijatovic to get access to Crimea at all times. So whenever she wants to travel, she wants to speak to people on the ground. Russia cannot just, as a member of the Council of Europe, decline this kind of access. It doesn't matter when she wants to go or travel. This is her right, and Russia has the opportunity and the responsibility to show some good faith in that process. So far, we're not really experiencing this good faith. So taking you back to 2 years ago, I think it was a big mistake to, even though there had been no positive signs from the Russian side, we welcomed a delegation back that actually had sanctioned, European sanctioned delegation members on their parts. And I think that was really in German, you would say, a kick into the stomach of not only the Ukrainian delegation, but a kick into the stomach of all democratic partners within the Council of Europe. Another perspective, another pillar within the Berlin discussion is obviously the elephant in the room, and that is Nord Stream 2 and the whole debate about it. So far, I think the G7, for example, send a good signal, and maybe we'll talk about that later, that Europe has voiced its support for Ukraine by High Representative Borrell, that we still stand behind, very firmly stand behind our, well, the notion that Crimea was legally annexated, but still there is this project that Chancellor Merkel describes as an economic project, and that is Nord Stream 2. And within the whole member states of the European Union, Germany is an outsider with this project. We already knew back then that European partners, not only Ukraine, but European partners also said, this is not a project that should go forward without a European joint initiative. And what we experienced in the last weeks and months was exactly what we warned for that could happen. And that is that the Kremlin and Vladimir Putin is basically oppressing or extorting his sway over Ukrainian soil by saying, well, if Nord Stream 2 is basically committed and presented, we will not lead any gas through Ukraine. And this cannot happen, because this is not the way Germany should present itself within this whole discussion. So what we proposed, and you might excuse that, but we're in the midst of a campaign also in Germany. So we proposed a Nord Stream 2 moratorium, because we don't see any, and I said that before, any show of good faith from the Russian side to give into certain dialogues, to give into certain ways moving forward on the political agenda, on the political level. So what we did further was to propose, as the Free Democrats in the Bundestag, to say, how can we strengthen our European partner, our Ukrainian partners? Why don't we do it with other kinds of energy formats? So we proposed in a initiative to have Ukraine as an important and strong partner for the hydrogen technology, because also Ukraine is a very important player in that area. So maybe on these two parts, yes, it is an economic discussion, but it is also a political one, and we shouldn't disconnect these two. And maybe a last point, the overarching goal, I'm very certain that we all agree on that, is the deoccupation of Crimea. But what we can do in the meantime, until this goal is hopefully finally achieved, is, and that is the underlying goal, helping people that suffer from human rights violations in Crimea. And we heard about how vast these violations have come forward, unfortunately, in the past. And also looking into the future, how we can address these topics on a political level. Maybe as a last point, we had the so-called ALDE Congress just this weekend ago, and ALDE Congress has approved a resolution of Volos to officially support and endorse the Crimean platform, and I think that's a good signal also for the very much appreciated input that Ukraine and President Zelensky did on this introduction of a new platform. I think that this could only help and also bring together other partners and even similar partners from other formats to maybe give a little bit more drive into the discussion that we so desperately need. I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Chairwoman. And before I pass the floor to Wilfried Jelge, may I please remind you to put your questions into the Q&A function. I was told by the organizers that a few people have their hands up, and we cannot react to it technically. So please write your questions into the Q&A function. Wilfried, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank all speakers for your great inputs and for the invitation. I would like to put our Crimean issue of human rights a little bit in the context of security. I think we have to remind that Crimea was annexed a priori for military strategic reasons. I mean, there were many reasons for Putin to do that. I cannot go back to that, but you should understand that with Crimea in your hands, you have wide possibilities to project power in the whole Black Sea region. That is very important. Look at the map and you see that it is like a platform. You can control and observe all the coasts of the littoral states in Crimea. And that is the first point I would like to underline. We speak here not only and exclusively of an issue of human rights and security of Ukraine. It is a deep European issue. So everything what happens around the peninsula, for example, in April, when we saw that the concentration of troops has a clear southern dimension, when Russia, for example, closed up unprecedentedly whole sections of Ukrainian exclusive economic zone, and thus hampered the free navigation of sea, what is not allowed. Even if Russia would have that zone as its own, then it is not allowed simply to close up these territories, these equatorial territories, as well to close up the Azov Sea. We can say that that despite the fact that commercial ships have still access more or less to the Azov Sea, but that is also blockaded by the delays on the Cap Street, we can say that we here have a case of violation of navigation, which is important in the global context. Please look what happens in the Baltic Sea, what happens in the Arctic. Look at the patterns of behavior Russia is taking also in other seas, but look also on imitations of other states, of other autocratic states, which, if that is not sanctioned, will imitate these measures in other fields of the world. So that is in our interest to take care here. And the strive for dominance in the wider Black Sea region is also the reason why human rights on the one hand and security is deeply connected in Crimea. By engaging repression against dissidents and promoting systematic demographic change, that is very important, Russia is trying to create a population in Crimea that is entirely loyal to the Kremlin. Olga already spoke about some methods like the so-called patriotic education of kids, yes, what is nothing as a militarization. You said it already, Olga. But we have here also violations of international law, which concern the transfer directly or indirectly by the occupying power of parts of its own civilian population into the territory it occupies, or the deportation or transfer of people which are parts of the population in the occupied territory which is expelled to the mainland. So that is an ongoing, let me say, purification of Crimean population. That is important. And we should also explain in Germany that hard hits Ukrainians, which, by the way, do not want to give up their passport, do not accept. That is also another issue, the Russian passport and Crimean Tatars, but it also concerns Crimean Russians. We should understand that it concerns everyone who is not sufficiently loyal from the point of view of the Kremlin. And another example, what is also very important, and sometimes these cases are overlooked in our mass media, softly speaking, is, for example, that in May 2020, Russian issued decrees that makes Ukrainians and Crimean Tatars foreigners in their own homeland. Yes, the decree makes amendments to a list of coastal territories which foreign nationals, stateless persons, and foreign legal entities cannot have land, so cannot have property of land. That means that you see the very clear security dimension. Yes, they do not want to have people they call illoyal in regions that have access to the Black Sea. Last point, what can be done? I try to be brief, Miriam, and then you can ask maybe other things. I think it is very positive that we have the Crimean platform. Why? Because you have to understand, Crimea is not something you can deal with in far future. Crimea and the southern dimension of Russian behavior is the original cause of the Donbas conflict. We should understand that all these de facto entities and unresolved conflict around the Black Sea region, I mean, they are not by accident lying all around the Black Sea region and the hinterland, has the origin in Crimea. The Donbas is a side event. That should be clear. And if you want, in the end, finally, and in a sustainable way, come to an acceptable solution of that issue, you cannot rule out Crimea and the Black Sea dimension. And look also of the concentration of troops in April. We now have new battalions in Crimea, which can prepare so-called land assault operations against the Crimean, against the southern Ukrainian coast. We have more warships in Crimea than before, which were deployed from other fleets of Russia in the shadow of that big concentration of troops to Crimea. That is important to understand. Last point, what can be done? I think we can do very concrete things. When it comes to human rights, two things. At first, we have interesting sanctions also concerning Crimea, which were very effective. But what we need is, we need also a more coherent follow-up system of the sanctions which were applied, for example, in 2014, but which are now not effective for the real persons who have now the power in certain institutions of Crimea. So we need a more coherent and systematic, we need not new sanctions, we need a very systematic follow-up. And second point, we have now in Ukraine, for example, a department of the general prosecution, which is specialized for the supervision in criminal proceedings of crimes committed in the occupied territories, including Crimea, which is headed by Mr. Mamedov, a very famous reformer in Ukrainian prosecution. And I think Germany, France, and all the proponents of international law could support these new institutions, which are working quite well, quite effectively, with trainings of detectives, with trainings of investigators, with an exchange of good practices of investigations. So we have very concrete issues to be discussed in the Crimean platform. Thank you.
Thank you, Wilfried. Before I go to the questions of the audience, one question to you, Madam Minister. You've heard what Gyde Jensen has said. Is this what you specifically expect of the German reaction to this initiative? If you could comment on what she described. And to Olga Skripnik and also to Gyde Jensen, please, if you could shed a bit light on the international law situation. The case is pending because of the serious human rights violation you described at the International Criminal Court, the court case pending because of the population shifts, discrimination of minorities, and maybe Ms. Jensen, what about fighting impunity in Germany using the principle of universal jurisdiction? First, you have the floor, Mrs. Japarova, and I'd like to add a question from the chat about the severance of ties between Ukrainians by Mattia Nellis, currently in Kiev. Could you please outline some of the specific measures to keep links with the Ukrainian citizens still residing on the peninsula to win, keep the hearts and minds? Mrs. Japarova, Madam Minister, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mariam. Many questions you have announced, so I really need a lot of time to answer those questions. But first, commenting what is expected in terms of the support to the Crimea Platform Initiative, I think I will focus on three basic elements. The first is actually participation in the summit, because my President Volodymyr Zelensky invited Madam Chancellor Merkel to participate 23rd of August during the summit and at the summit events. So we still have not received response. So of course we do expect that Germany will be not only symbolically but also physically participate in the summit at the highest level, which will be a super signal, including for Russia, that this initiative is already being set. Because as I told you, Russia is doing its best to powder up, to silence up the issue. Their whole tactics go to reconcile the whole international community with the status quo. They say Crimea is ours already, life is great. We do build up roads, we do build up schools and kindergartens, but they keep silence. What is the purpose of this infrastructure build up, which Wilfried rightly pointed, saying that this is the military and defense cause behind every step that Russia takes in Crimea. Second, what we expect is actually sanction policy. And again, I refer to Wilfried's words that there should be a very, not only instruments of sanction, but also monitoring of the results of the effectiveness of the sanctions, because what we track at the moment, that smart business has already found out the ways how to escape sanctions. Just the recent examples in Belohirsk, which is a small city near Simferopol, approximately 40 kilometers, Russian occupying administration built up the water pump station, and the pump equipment came from Denmark. So when we demarched, when we actually via our embassy made a call for the company, they said that they didn't know they sold it out for Krasnodar company. And there are many more cases like Auchan, the famous French brand is in Simferopol. We still have BMW, Mercedes cars sold out in Crimea. I mean, there are really many instruments how smart business already escape the sanction policy. And I think that we also have to follow the effectiveness of sanctions. And third, which is very important in terms of the digital world that we all live in, where public awareness, cognitive influence has super great result in terms of the choice, what people make in their elections or electing this or that politicians. And at the end, we have this general position of country. And of course, I think that when we speak about Germany, the project of Nord Stream still says that there is a huge gap in terms of raising the awareness of what Russia is today, why we cannot dance tango with Russia, why we cannot tolerate actually or support these geopolitical projects like Nord Stream 2. And I think that it goes to two sentiments that I can feel in the German society. First, where Germans tend to think that the Second World War is kind of the results of the Second World War has been monopolized by Russia, that only Russian people suffered, but millions of Ukrainians, millions of other entities and minorities and nationalities participated in the Red Army, like Crimean Tatars, Ukrainians, they all were fighting within the Red Army. And second, I think there's another sentiment that there is a kind of a gratitude for Gorbachev, who played his role in reuniting Germany. And I think it's also something that gives this sentiment of justification of Russia's current crimes. So with this, I stop.
Thank you, Madam Minister. Olga, I'd like to give the floor to Gyde Jensen first, because I know that she has to leave more or less at 11 hours sharp. So, Mrs. Chairwoman, you have the floor first.
Thank you very much. Maybe just a note to what Madam Minister just pointed out or outlined. I think this sentiment that you described within the German population, that might definitely be true for, let's say, the older generation. However, and I think that is politically speaking very much important for the future, also for the sentiment in Germany, is that we have a young generation that is very much political and has been politicized over the past years. And I think they think in a different way. They pay much more attention to international humanitarian law, to human rights violations, to the fact that we still see very much impunity, for example, of Russian aggression in Crimea, but also in other parts where, for example, passports being handed out just to create prejudice between Ukrainians and people who have also Russian passports. So maybe there is a big potential also for the next generation and the talks that definitely need to take place in the next years. Maybe with regard to the universal jurisdiction question from you, Ms. Kosmir, I think that's a very important one for the future, because within the fight against impunity, especially with regard to Russia, this potential cannot be underestimated, even in Germany, because what we know is that Russia infringes on international law all the time, and they do not feel the consequences of the international courts that are actually there. And what we need, and our Attorney General in Germany has some cases, not only with regard to Russia, but actually with regard to other impunity cases of other countries. So maybe this is something we should talk a little bit more about in Germany in the future. We only need, in parentheses, but we only need the existence of the intention of, for example, separating communities from each other, or separating or deconstructing certain ethnicities from their home countries, from their way of life. We see that in parts of China, for example. We see that with regard to Saudi Arabia, and I think that could also make a case maybe for the situation in Crimea. That is very, well, that is a stretch, but I think it could be a potential way of dealing with the situation in Crimea with regard to imposing even more sanctions to Russia and maybe gathering intelligence and information, because this is how a case starts, gathering information, and then that could help not only Germany, but also our Human Rights Commissioner, Dunja Mijatovic, in the Council of Europe, for example, if she is not able to slowly but steady go and visit the field and talk to people who have been affected by human rights violations. So I think this is an important question that we should shed some light on in the next German federal government.
Many thanks, Gude Jensen. Olga, you have the floor now, and please focus on the population shifts, because there have been 2 questions regarding this in the chat as well, and the question on the severance of ties between Ukrainians and what to do.
And before was question about international level decisions, yes?
Well, if you can briefly shed some light on to which extent the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice are important, but I'm afraid we run out of time. So maybe if you can make it short, yes.
Okay, I tried to be briefly. One more maybe about international level and very important decision about International Criminal Court. It's that the prosecutor of International Criminal Court announced that all statutory criteria of opening investigation into the situation in Ukraine had been met. And the next step will be to request authorization from the judges of pretrial chamber of the court to open investigations. I think it's very important decision. It's a result of cooperation between the Ukrainian prosecutor office and human rights defender, like Mr. Mamedov, my colleague, said about him. And maybe a few words about some Ukrainian step for keep connection between Crimeans and Ukrainian controlled territories. Maybe one good example, recently example, it's that Ukraine has begun free COVID testing on the checkpoint. One more, it's the government provides financial assistance to political prisoners and their families. For this, a special state commission is working, which consists of representatives of state bodies and civil society. For example, I'm one of the members of this commission. And of course, at the same time, it's important that the Ukrainian parliament will adopt a comprehensive law on the protection of political prisoners, including various types of assistance after release from a place of detention, because many of these issues now need to help from Ukrainian government. I think maybe I stop and give time for my colleagues.
Thank you, Olga. I'm very sorry that we run out of time, but I think that today's event definitely shed some light on possible coordinated responses to the many unremedied challenges the Russian occupation has created. I think it is fair to say that we all have an interest in ensuring that human rights violations and violations of international law do not meet with impunity. And I believe that this event has highlighted the need, but also some concrete steps how to adapt existing alliances, strategies, institutions, to evolve our international reactions, diplomacy, concretely international law and human rights protection in the face of what is a pattern of action of new geopolitics. Thank you to all of you, and I think the discussion has just shown that there is enough reason to continue this series of information, and now we wish you the best for August 23rd.
you. Bye.